This past July, the New York Times published the Decameron Project, named after Giovanni Boccaccio's book, The Decameron, written as the plague ravaged 14th century Florence. 29 authors shared short stories inspired by our pandemic. The Israeli writer Edgar Keret, in his piece Outside, wrote about a man who stepped foot outside his home in Israel for the first time after the mandated quarantine ended. The man is disoriented after so much time in isolation. He forgets what he used to do for a living. He forgets where he is headed. He wants a cigarette, but he left his at home. Carrot writes, so you walk to the corner store and find you have nothing but a 5-shekel coin in your wallet. The tall young man at the checkout, who reeks of sweat, snatches the cigarette pack he just handed you. I'll keep it for you here. When you ask if you can pay with a credit card, he grins as if you just told him a joke. His hand touched yours when he took the cigarettes back, and it was hairy like a rat. 120 days have passed since someone last touched you. Your heart pounds, the air whistles through your lungs, and you're not sure if you're going to make it. Near the ATM sits a man wearing dirty clothes, and there's a tin cup next to him. You do remember what you're supposed to do in this situation. You quickly walk past him, and when he tells you in a cracked voice that he hasn't eaten anything in 2 days, you look in the opposite direction, avoiding eye contact like a pro. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's like riding a bike. The body remembers everything, and the heart that softened while you were alone will harden back up in no time. It's an unnerving story, written to make us feel uncomfortable. Rosh Hashanah is a time of celebration, but it's also a time of deep reflection. This is a time for being uncomfortable. Over these last 6 months, our hearts have softened and hardened, and we have felt so many emotions as the pandemic has jolted us and intruded into our lives. At times, our hearts would crack open and our generosity would just spill out. And then we would pivot. We would turn inwards and we would become more cautious, more self-absorbed, and more selfish than we would like to admit. There's a maxim that says the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. It can be helpful guidance, perhaps, if you're friends with someone who flakes on you and consistently lets you down. Even though you hope that the next time she'll act differently, there's a good chance that she will disappoint you again. Habits are powerful and not easily broken. Her past behavior does seem to predict her future behavior. The idea, though, is a bit too simplistic. There's too much evidence that disproves such a direct correlation between past and future behavior. It doesn't take into account the complexity of the particular circumstances a person finds themselves in, and it leaves no room for tshuva, for the possibility of real change, of turning towards our best selves and acting differently in the future. The great medieval Jewish scholar Maimonides asks, what is tshuva gemura? What is complete repentance? He answers that it's when we find ourselves in the same situation as we were in before, and we have the opportunity to repeat the wrongdoing, but we decide not to do it. It's that moment when we turn, when we choose differently, when we find the strength to do what we know is right. We act with intention and we make a commitment to changing ourselves. We abandon the force of habit, unlike the man in Edgar Keret's story. Even if our bodies remember how we've acted in the past, our bodies can learn to act in new ways in the future. As Keret illuminates for us, this is not easy. Putting other people's needs before our own is hard. What would it take for us to really be there for someone else? To be there for a person asking for food, or for a coworker who's being treated unfairly, or for a loved one who is ill? When we say we don't have the bandwidth to reach out to someone else, is it really that we don't have the energy? Or have we quietly determined that the other person's feelings aren't a priority? Acting with intention and choosing differently is hard. I don't think we'll forget this time of COVID-19 anytime soon. 5 or 10 or 30 years from now, we'll remember our anxiety about catching the virus. We'll remember our anger when we realized that our national leaders betrayed us. We'll remember our grief when we confronted the loss of life and income and work, when illness was all around us, when the pandemic blocked our dreams. Given that the future is still so unknown and that life is still so uncertain, that the pandemic still rages, we should ask ourselves at this Rosh Hashanah, how do we want to act? How do we wish to treat other people during such heartbreak? We might also ask ourselves how our family and friends and coworkers will remember us at this time. Will they remember us as generous and open-hearted, even when we were anxious and angry and grieving? Or will they remember us as self-absorbed and selfish, as irritable and distant? There is so much loss all around us. Loss for ourselves, loss for others. We likely can't even comprehend the loss. And it's not like things were so great before the pandemic, with war and poverty and violence and the devastation of our earth. But when we experience loss, we have to grieve, put ourselves right there in that sadness, and stay there until we are able to move through it. It's a long, ongoing process. And even so, as we hold that grief, we also confront the reality that we are not helpless. And that's scary, because if we're not helpless, it means that we can act. Even though we have so little control over what unfolds in the world in the next 6 months, we do have control over who we are and how we want to act and live in the world. We have control over what we do when we encounter someone who is hungry. We have control over whether we yell at our kids. We have control over whether we binge watch on Netflix or get out the vote. Tonight we celebrate our blessings. We join as a community. We enter these holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur together. Let's be in this together. Let's be intentional and generous. And let's reflect deeply on who we wish to become in the next year. L'Shana Tova, may it be a year of health and sweetness.